So I presented this sermon here about 5 years ago. I've tweaked it a little bit, but it seemed timely, and I thought it was a good time to consider what the essence of the situation might really be. Here we are, early January. We're at the start of a new year. It's a time when our thoughts are often turned toward what this new year will hold. It's also a time when we are still immersed in this dark and gray time of winter. So this darkness was on my mind one day as I was looking through a journal that I kept. And I came across a quote that I'd written down that was from the songwriter Arlo Guthrie. And he said, "You can't have a light without a dark to put it in." I first read these words shortly after returning home from a trip to Kenya. And this was a required cross-cultural experience during my seminary time that was designed to remove my seminarian cohort from life as we knew it. And the trip was really wonderful. It was filled with a lot of contradictions, which was kind of the point of the trip. One day we were moving very, very slowly through Nairobi traffic. And before I go any further, I want to kind of paint a picture of what Nairobi traffic is like. So imagine cars and vans, buses and trucks, bumper to bumper, with very few signal lights, no traffic cops. Numerous scooters would zip through any small opening that opened up. Any opening was either filled with a scooter or immediately filled by another vehicle. And it wasn't uncommon to see along the side of the road somebody leading a herd of goats or cows. And into this chaotic mix is added any number of folk who were wandering through traffic selling pretty much anything that you could imagine. So I saw people selling bananas, they were selling sunglasses, clothing. There was one person that was carrying above his head like a 5-foot coat rack that was for sale. And one of my companions noticed a man on the side instructing a young boy who looked to be about 8 or 9 years old to head over to the 2 vehicles that our group was traveling in. And the traffic was moving slowly enough so that he could easily keep pace with us for a while. He approached the lead van and he held out his hands asking for money for food. Well, before we set out for this trip, we prepared for our travels by reading up on any number of topics that were related to Kenya, but we paid particular attention to considering what constituted good aid versus toxic aid. Our instructor asked us to refrain from giving money outright, such as in this situation, so that we didn't contribute to a culture of dependency. But rather, if we were so inclined to channel our resources towards local vendors, support them, or give money to organizations that were doing work to address the root causes of poverty. Yet, when we were brought face to face with this child, our hearts broke. Here we were. We were well cared for. All of our needs were taken care of. We were confronted by need, and we had the ability to send a bit of money his way. We could have sent money and not even have noticed that it was gone. Well, traffic sped up. We continued on our way, leaving this young boy behind, and leaving many of us feeling confused, conflicted, and guilty. A few days later, we visited a small church in the midst of one of the largest slums in Africa. I was taken aback initially by what I saw there, really horrid living conditions. But the longer I looked, I witnessed great beauty there as well. And the pastor of this particular church was a former slum resident. He grew up in that community. he was able to envision a different life for himself. He took advantage of community support. He kicked a drug addiction. He finished his education. He married, and he returned so that he could lend support to others in need. So the church, and we're talking a small space, maybe a fifth of the size of this room, small space. And next to the church was a small school for children whose parents couldn't afford school fees. So in many African countries, in Kenya, you needed to be able to buy uniforms before you could go to school. And many people didn't have the funds to do that. So this church or the school was set up for those children so they could get an education, even though their resources were very limited. Again, very small building, very minimally furnished. But if you stood on the doorsill and you looked out the schoolhouse door, it was easy from my Western perspective to just see hopelessness. But what I saw was that within each child, there was a sense of possibility that loomed large as they shared with us their dreams for their future. And we were moved to a different kind of tears when one young girl began singing Bob Marley's song, One Love, and she invited us to join in. One love, one heart, let's get together and feel all right. We were all in tears. The environment that I initially viewed with a sense of despair was the home for these same children and their dreams. A home that certainly presented all kinds of obstacles, but it was one that was also filled with its own aliveness and vibrancy. And I was struck by the allness of life there. And all of this made me wonder, how often do we go through life wishing to cherry pick our experiences, or at least what we put on our social media profiles, in an effort to create what we think might look like a perfect life? A life that doesn't have struggle, that doesn't have pain, heartbreak, grief, death. Certainly, such a life would ensure that the children that we were with, that all children always would have enough to eat, always would have enough love. And this is where I got stuck on those words from Arlo. You can't have a light without a dark to put it in. How do we reconcile the good and the bad that life serves us? How do we deal with suffering, our own, and that which we see so readily in the world around us? And I am constantly wrestling with this interplay and the balance between the inner labor of self-liberation that each of us must do and the interconnected web, the communal work that we must engage in for the greater whole. And when I speak of individual labor, that inner labor, I ask myself, does my social location inform how I view the world? Does the absence of any obvious oppression in my life cause me to try and simplify such big questions? I certainly don't believe the narrative of the rugged individual that suggests that someone is solely responsible for pulling themselves up from the proverbial bootstraps. It's obvious to me that we are interconnected and that we need each other in so very many ways. It's obvious that we have not all been born into this world on an equal footing. Many of us have tremendous obstacles to overcome, while others of us find ourselves near the finish line before the race even begins. With all that considered, there still are things that only I can do, that only you can do. And that is the inner work that, despite our external circumstances, belongs uniquely to each of us alone. So recognizing that we are on this thing called life together, recognizing that we truly need each other to survive, recognizing that life is not fair, that there are great injustices at play, recognizing all of this, today's focus is skewed toward the inner labor that lies before us all. Buddhist teacher and nun Pema Chodron says that the Buddha only taught two things, suffering and the end of suffering. She says that the end of suffering has to do with how we deal with pain. And painful things happen in our lives. There's no two ways about it. They happen to us, they happen to those around us. And I'm sure that you can think of any number of times when you've had a painful experience. It might be the pain of a cut finger, a broken leg, the ramifications of a debilitating illness. Could be the pain of losing a job, of losing someone you love, having harsh words or actions directed toward you. But our pain escalates into suffering only when we find it difficult to let go and simply experience the pain for what it is in the moment. So very often we end up getting hooked. We become absorbed with the difficulties that come. Pema Chodron goes on to say that anger's like that, prejudice is like that, our critical mindedness is like that. Often we don't want to let go. There's something almost delicious about finding fault with something. We seem unable to resist. She continues, one of the main things that we seem to be addicted to is escalating aggression. And if you watch politics, it's like pouring kerosene on the fire. In an attempt to put it out, we pour kerosene on the fire. So the challenge remains, the suffering continues, as long as we resist the experience of the original pain. Now, I want to say something here very clearly. Sometimes we need time. We need lots of time to process something that feels incomprehensible. Sometimes the magnitude of pain is so great that we must protect ourselves and refrain from probing the hurt. Yet, there does come a time on a path toward healing and wholeness when we need to turn and face that original pain. Author James Baldwin said, everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And I recognize the importance of this in my own life. I cannot hope to affect change in the world if I'm unwilling to face the source of my discomfort and name it, whether it be issues that exist in the public sphere or in my own personal life, the concerns that I often prefer to ignore. So while we certainly don't wish adversity or suffering upon ourselves or others as an avenue for growth, it is through our experiences, all of our experiences, that we begin to acquire wisdom and through which we begin to live life in a much deeper way. So we're going to return to the story of the farmer, the point of the story. And I'm going to suggest that our cultural tendency to label things as either good or bad may not be the most useful construct. Taoists have taken another approach to considering what is good and what is bad, which is represented in the yin-yang symbol, and I think you're probably familiar with it. It's the circle that's comprised of interlocking white and black shapes. So there's a dot of black in the middle of the white part, and there's a dot of white within the black. if I said that correctly and didn't get mixed up. Even though the black and the white, good and bad, exist, there also exists a sense of movement between them. Good and bad don't stand in opposition to one another. They exist in relationship to one another. They're components of something larger than either alone. And I can imagine that you could be thinking, there really are bad things that happen in this life, right? What about senseless shootings and climate change? What about asylum-seeking families who are torn apart? Or the forces that seem bent on destroying democracy? And what about a million other things that we just cannot control? I'm not going to try and tell you that such things are good, but I will propose that when we are able to fully immerse ourselves in what is in front of us and resist being consumed by the intensity of the circumstance, it may be possible to find that we become so absorbed that we refrain from judging it as good or bad. It simply is what is in front of us. And when we allow ourselves to become fully immersed, we can tap into a kind of creativity that is otherwise unavailable to us. A creativity that we can use to look for solutions to problems in our lives and in the larger world. There's a woman named Karen Allen. She has a blog, and she said, "No matter what the circumstances, you deserve to enjoy your life. Between our birth and our death are a chain of moments. These moments are what we get. We owe it to no one to squander them in misery, rage, depression, and frustration." She continues, "This does not mean that we should stop caring about others and the fate of our planet. It doesn't mean that we should stop worrying and learn to love the bomb. And I must add, it doesn't mean that we refuse to speak up and loudly speak truth to injustice." She goes on, "What it does mean is that each of us has to get to a place within ourselves where we can focus our attention without relying on a constant lash of anxiety and fear for motivation. It means nurturing and strengthening our spirits so we can encompass the sad and the difficult, and yet still see the joy and beauty that this life holds. And as a result, possibility for creative solutions. To do the work ahead, each of us will need patience, clarity, and strength. Each of us will need to tap into the deep well of our life force that we have zero access to if thunderstorms of fear and misery always rage around us. So now, in an aid to each of us to help us clear out some of the internal messages we hold that keep us from immersing ourselves in the all-ness of our lives, you're invited to take part in a ritual of the burning bowl. Where so I'll describe what we're going to do here, and then we'll actually do it. So there's some flash paper up here. It's special paper. Anybody who wants to participate, you're invited to come up through this aisle that's leading to the table. Shannon's going to help out here. She'll hand you one of these pieces of paper, and imagine putting those things that stop you from those messages of fear, of anxiety, all of those things that prevent you from really engaging in the moment. Imbue that paper with those things, the things you want to release, the things that stop you from living fully into this precious chain of moments that make up your life. And friends at home, later or sometime this week, you can engage in a similar practice on your own. Make sure you're safe, fire safety. So after, in a moment, you're going to be invited to come forward. We'll do this in silence. take a piece of this paper, and I'm going to demonstrate it before. So we'll do that part. So you're going to be releasing what you no longer want to hold on to. And then we're going to step over to this other candle and these little votives, and you're invited to take one of those and light that. And this is what you're lifting up that you want to bring into this new year. So I'm going to demonstrate the flash paper. It's exciting and it's a little startling. So if you want to participate but you don't want to handle the paper, I can help you with that. So I'll demonstrate first. And Jason, when you're ready, we'll transition. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the remaining pieces of paper, and this will be lifting up the things that everyone at home may be imagining. So as I light each one, you can claim one for yourself. From ancient myths to Star Wars, the hero's journey has always been marked by the overcoming of great difficulty. Our friend the farmer knew that he could not stop things from happening, but he had a chance of controlling how he reacted to them. And he also knew that it is often not the experience itself that matters as much as what we do with those experiences. So, here is the invitation. In this season of inward reflection and returning light, take note of the stories that you are telling yourself. Are you submerged in a world where good and bad are always conflicting one another? Are you willing to pause and take a we'll see approach? Are you willing to immerse yourself in the allness of life that surrounds you?